Hey, you. So I'm late. Oh, you're muted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We just finished Mom's eye drop regimen. It's in both eyes now with time gaps in between drops, and it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
The operation went well, and she's seeing much better now, and her color perception is back to normal. Red no longer looks like hot cocoa.
Very good. Huh. Okay. Yeah, that must have been quite odd. Quite odd indeed.
Yeah, because I have the the normal male pattern color deficiency in the red-green portion of the spectrum, and suddenly I was getting colors right and she was getting them wrong, which was totally bizarre because she was always my touchstone when it came to color calls.
Right.
And suddenly my blue shirts were black to her, and my red shirts were cocoa colored.
Wow.
It's how the universe tells you it's time to have your cataracts out.
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty bizarre. I just now uploaded the printed version to Amazon. I'll talk about it in a minute when Mark is back with us.
Very good.
It was actually a big pain because the book has too many pages. So I had to delete our, what am I trying to say? I had to delete our timeline from the printed version, which I think is okay. It's mostly a reference piece at the back. But
Yeah.
the annoying thing is I wanted to have a different DOI, ISBN, because it's a different work. But no. They wouldn't let that happen, so I just have to change a thing.
Ooh, that could confuse scholars down the road.
Yeah, it could, couldn't it? I just hope Mark Anderson is not listening. I'll confuse him now.
How's your mother doing? I've been worried about her.
She's having an angiogram on Monday. So thank you for that. So everything should be fine. Other than that, so to speak. But there will be Christmas in England, not in Norway. She's quite unhappy about that.
Well, her health comes first.
It does, even though she may not agree with that.
Sounds like my dad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, as you said, yeah, exactly, unfortunately. Have you got your book yet? The PDF version, at least? I put the link
No, haven't
just now.
Haven't had a chance to download it yet. Let's see. It should be in the email. Let me open my mail package. Okay, Future Text 3 is now available. And here's the web link. Okay, web link, PDF. It's taking a little time for it to download into the browser.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting there, I think. Yes, Future of Text 3. Spoken augmented PDF.
So weird.
Ooh, a lot of pages.
Yeah, that's a lot of pages.
Next time we may have to break it up into more than one mini volume, at least as far as the hard copy version goes.
Yeah, I was thinking we could talk about that today. Let's see who joins us. Definitely something we need to consider. Or maybe we stop doing a book and we just make the journal and we do that in a more regimented fashion.
I'm going to enjoy reading through all of this in full.
Yeah, that'll take a while.
Let's see, are the biographies in there somewhere or no?
Yeah, they're just in the glossary.
Ah, I see.
Where's Fabienne? Mark, are you there? Yeah, what do you think? Should we maybe consider moving over to a journal instead of book? Maybe even make it bi-monthly.
Somebody's giving them money.
Ah, that sounds like my tea.
Very
I'm
good.
no good until I have my morning tea. Are you out there, Mark?
I saw him talking to someone off the screen, most likely his wife, and then he disappeared. So maybe there's things to do in the house.
Well, it is that time of year.
Yeah.
So how's your weather? It's all wet and gloomy here, but luckily no snow.
Oh, we got lots of snow. It's actually quite nice. It stayed stable. It hasn't gotten mushy. So that's a big one. But yeah. God, my video camera is so bizarre. Try to make it a little less bizarre.
Sorry, I had to deal with something. With the urgent problem dropped in my lap just so I went online.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Hey, Mark. Right. Yeah. So Peter was just pointing out the obvious, which is the book is huge, and we also have a printing problem. I had to remove the timeline in order to get the page count down to allow Amazon to physically print it.
Yep.
I've also gone in the book and removed blank pages. On the proper version, everything starts with on the left page, every new article.
Yep.
Well, no, every new person anyway. That's no longer the case. That's a bit random now. So I had no choice.
I think that's fine, and I wouldn't sort of beat yourself up about it. I mean, that's the reality of having so much information. But it's a really good, in a sense, start of a dog feeding exercise for next year, because you might say, well, next year's we're going to get bigger, and it goes back to this thing about, well, how do you want, that what do we really mean by a book in the digital age?
Yeah, well, I mean, also considering the printed one. So what I was suggesting now was maybe we drop the book entirely and just do a journal. But maybe not a monthly journal, maybe even a bi-monthly journal would be good.
I still
yeah,
like format,
sorry,
though.
Peter, go ahead. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I still like the idea of it being a book. There's more of a sense of permanence to it. Well, a library would be more likely to collect it than have an old journal, because a lot of times they'll just drop older year journals, whereas books have a better chance of surviving in a collection longer.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. But
so what I'd suggest might be a multi-volume book, if we could break it into 2 or 3 parts based upon the nature of the subject matter. So maybe you could have, if you're going to do it based on, say, the background of the participants, so you could have volume 1 academia, volume 2 industry, and divide the perspectives between the two that way. Or you could pick some technical frame to partition it along. So it could be, maybe reference systems versus, I don't know, whatever. But, a little sort of a hard frame. For instance, when I eventually come out with my textbook on computer science for lawyers, I'm going to have part 1 is going to be theory, part 2 is going to be enabling technologies, and part 3 is going to be applications, and each one could be a standalone mini physical volume to address the monster size that the magna opus is eventually going to come to.
Well, we are doing theme, of course, per year. So that's to have a subcategory within the year, I think would be difficult. But I do think we can do the exact opposite of what you said, which is to have a journal, but combine it into a book at the end of the year, right? And that book may, for instance, I had to remove, I think, one screenshot, then I had to do this reformatting. So we could say the book will be the same, but it will not have the beautiful double layouts. There will be less screenshots. We will, there will be some differences. So we will have all the information like we do now, but it will be entirely copy and paste from the journal rather than.
Well, I wouldn't dwell too much on the differences, because that's just, it's all well intentioned, but in a sense it just puts people off. So, it is what it is. We can put a small editorial comment that due to physical size or something, it's some pieces have to be removed. But I actually think there's a good and there is some good inside this. So the frustration is, well, you can't just take the camera alert. You can't just take what we've got, in the sense of the digital book that we've got. We can't just take that and put it in a physical form, because actually there are some constraints to its size. But it's also, I think, is a really good forced reflection for us on the fact that, well, a physical book actually has limitations. It gets too big, and okay, you split into volumes, but you're still, in a sense, unless it was designed to be a multi-volume opus. In other words, if Year 3 was designed to be in 3 sub-volumes, fair enough. But in reality, it's just staving off the fact that in the form it's presented, there is sort of too much. So how do we make that more available? And in a book, there is the sort of thing you want it all there, because you want to we're used to culturally the fact that I can take it off the shelf. Serendipitously, everything is there, and I might just open it at the wrong page, and I might read an article I otherwise never would have read. And certainly in some digital presentations, that's not possible. But I'm also conscious that's a very atavistic way of looking at it, saying, well, we can't change it because this is so good. And the reality is we're talking about doing things in VR, where we've got all sorts of new affordances. So the real fun challenge for us is to how to get from the richness of the old to a different richness of the new without dropping too much on the way.
Yeah, sorry, what's going on with my old computer here? No, I think I agree with exactly all those points and issues. And the thing is, if people read this book in Reader and they know how to use that software, it's relatively readable. I don't expect most people to do that, obviously. So if you read it in a normal PDF reader, there's a hell of a lot of pages to skip if you're not interested in a specific thing. It's too big. So it's too big even digitally, where we don't need to worry about space, right? I think that's one thing that we need to take into account. So then it becomes a matter of, if we do release it as a journal and we're a bit more circumspect about, like Mark, you and me will probably have to spend an afternoon designing on a style guide for the journal. And then we actually do a little bit of promotion of the journal and say, this is our real thing. Oh, by the way, there's a book at the end of the year. But so we get the being in the library, and thanks to you, Peter, Volume 3 has now been added to the Internet Archive, because I did what you did with Volume 1. So, we can do all those things, but I think because one of the great things about our book is the discussions from monthly presentations are in there. And that's really unique. That's the kind of stuff that's usually lost. Mm. And that's obviously what makes it massive. So, hence and so forth.
Well, a reflection on that is that, if we find out, if for a moment, thought experiment, force majeure, we have to say, well, we have to split this up a bit. The one natural sort of line of cleavage would be to have effectively the talks and Q&As separate to the general contributed views, but it doesn't have to be sort of completely separate. I mean, one of the things that might cause us to do is a bit more cross-referencing, in the sense that, okay, well, this subject was about this.
That is not a bad idea.
The contributions from these people very much relate to, embodiment or it pushes you to look across.
That I'm not a big fan of, but I'm a really big fan of what I think you also said. In a traditional magazine in the olden days, like Mac User, you'd read it at a certain point, it says continuous page 200 in million, right? You go
Yep.
to the back to finish it. So what we could do is have all the transcribed presentations, because hardly anyone writes articles. Let's just accept that's the way it is in our community. We have the presentations, and then it says in the appendix, or maybe we don't call it appendix, we call it the dialogue section. So you click an internal normal PDF link and you get the dialogue. You know, something like that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think sorry.
go on.
I think part of the problem, I was just reflecting on your fact to say, you know, people aren't, you know, that there isn't enough writing. I mean, I think part of that is perhaps that if people sort of, you know, write or come to, you know, our various sort of Zoom conferences calls, so if you're here, for instance, as we are now, you're broadly speaking to people who are passing or of active interest in this broad subject area. Writing into a book does cause me to think, okay, well, there's a wider sort of audience out there. And am I sort of properly, you know, do I really need to bound my thought or my structure more? And you sort of tumble into more and more formality. I mean, part of the value of some of the just the meetup chats is, you know, at some point during the perhaps 2 hours, there'll be one or two really, really serendipitous points that are often really accidental observations that arise off the back of something else that sort of give us another glimpse of something that before we hadn't known. And that's where I think real value comes in. And that's sort of hard to do by just writing a short piece. Unless you're saying, I made this, it looks like this is what it is, this is how you use it, which is all very hard-edged and nicely definable.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're agreeing. And I think I spent some money now on my software, especially Reader. There's a new version available that does have the down arrow keys and all of that stuff. But the thing we've been talking about, bindings, I really think we should consider that. If we can find a way to, if someone has, let's say, let's say we've done 1 year and we've done bi-monthly journal, just for the sake of argument, and they are structured so that there is a known break in there between dialogue or not. We should be able to have an app or a Reader app that says, okay, show me the whole thing as a book, or show me only the articles, or it's, you know, etc. As in, that flexibility should be achievable, right? Because I do think it's nice to have a book. I mean, for me, ego-wise, you know, I'm the editor of a series of books, you know, with Mark, and that's, yeah, so nice. If I'm an editor of a journal, what the hell does that mean in this day and age? Not as much. And of course, Peter, your piece on, actually, hang on a second. So yeah, we were talking about the idea of having a journal, but treating it almost like a newsletter. That's the back and forth. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing, newsletter is also a very, very broad term. And, you know, it used to mean something. I think it means a lot of different things.
Oh, it just means in terms of distribution. I don't want to have an email newsletter as well.
No, I wasn't thinking in terms of medium. I just sort of mean that almost the term, I'm sort of not sure in 2022 as we are quite what a newsletter is compared to what I maybe thought it was 30 years ago. And I don't mind. I mean, things change. So what I'm getting at is maybe what a newsletter means to us is that we broadly redistribute some of the content that we're sitting on to people who may find it useful to consume it in that sense. Now that you said, you might say that seems silly because wait a minute, I have a copy of the book and I'm now being sent bits of the book, but I wager that some people would probably read more of the book by that means than otherwise, and that just points to, you know, things of the modern age, and a book does a different thing. You know, I think I see Peter reacted to it earlier. You know, part of it is I've got it all there. If I want it, it's there, and I have the offer of serendipity, perhaps, if I happen to open it on a page I hadn't been to before. But at the same time, I probably am not going to sit down and read it cover to cover like a sort of, you know, page turner on the aircraft, and that's not its role. So in that sense, something like a newsletter can take maybe a strand out of the thing. And it might be an editorialized thing. So rather than just giving you, say, an article, it might just say, in the book, the following people, sort of contributed on this broad subject. This subject also turns up in the Q&A after a number of the talks. So we give that sort of stranding, and we're giving a little hook on which people can perhaps even then come back to the community with a reflection on it. Peter.
Yeah, maybe what would be useful would be an RSS feed or two, maybe one dedicated feed for all literature sources that the community is generating, another feed to tools and systems that have like live code that you could get and play with, and another one for just, ideas and concepts, and another one for questions. So you could have a couple RSS feeds, and then I could open whichever feed was relevant to the area that I'm interested in at the moment. And it wouldn't even need to be an official volume number, it'd just be an ongoing feed. As stuff comes in, it goes back out under the appropriate category banner. Because it really resonated with me, Mark, when you said opening another fire hose. Because I have so many fire hoses open that I'm being flooded with material. I literally spend at least 1/3 of my day just filtering material coming across the different key streams that I'm monitoring. So it's a job in itself almost.
Yeah, but hang on. The job of being an editor is, of course, partly to choose some of these things, but I don't think I have the capacity to categorize things and to run different RSS feeds. That ain't going to happen. The whole thing of categorizing what something is, as we've talked, relatively often about, extremely difficult to do. Do you label someone an artist, or is this artist in code? Is it a tool for thought they're showing, or is it a this, or is it a that? And, we've tried now for 3 years in a row to get people to send in keywords, and it's really, really rare anyone does anything. And it's even rare that keywords are useful. But we do need to make it more digestible. There's no question about that. And it is nice to have a vanity book at the end. But how do we make it useful outside of that? Yeah, please go ahead.
Peter, are you still in hand-up mode? Okay, sorry. Well, another thing I'd throw in is you're right. I mean, it's nice to have the book, but it shouldn't be a existential nightmare for you come the end of every year to have to do, given that it for all this effort is basically producing what for most people is tantamount to a free book. So that's a lot of effort and thought for sense little movement forward, and I think it's worth bearing that in mind, because otherwise we undervalue what goes into it. But I think I think Peter's idea in the RSS feed appeals to me for one reason. It's a bit of tech that actually works, and it's survived all the sort of waves of fashion. As in terms of categorizing, I mean, I think his original point is just that, for instance, when we have a meetup, we often, things get mentioned, they're either clipped into the chat or they get mentioned, and if we're lucky, someone else will put in a URL and effectively memorialize that. Having those things in an RSS feed could be made as low friction as, for instance, because I think I can't remember if the chat log has timestamps, but it might just be literally a URL, maybe a name of something, a URL and a timestamp. So we're not suggesting somebody takes on board the sort of totally expanding job of finding that the thing they thought was just writing a number of URLs into an RSS feed becomes a research effort to find out what these things were. But I do think because I tend to clip them into the bottomless bin that is one of my Devonthink Pro dumpsters, and occasionally I get round to going through and doing a bit of weeding. But it's easier to collect them for me as I go and weed later. But lots of people probably don't do that. I'm lucky. I'm on 2 screens, so I'm not stuck for space in terms of having looking for something in a browser in one window and being able to follow the conversation in the other. Obviously, if say I'm on one 13-inch screen, that's much harder. So actually, just having a feed, and the data's all there at the end. So
I don't have any problems with the feed. I think that's a good idea. The problem I
Right.
have with is the categorization of having different feeds for different topics. I think that's too much work.
Well, okay, I'm going to push back gently on that, but I understand exactly what you say. But I do. Sorry, I took my hand down, so we're out of this all made. I do think that to a certain extent, at some point, we do have to do some categorization. I think if actually some of the research I did last year showed me anything, is that people keywording their own work is generally not useful. So at some point, we as a community do need to do some keywording. It can always be changed. But the truth is, we probably are the experts, because I don't see where the experts are who are going to come along and make a difference. And for my own part, I don't really mind if I categorize something, someone comes along and says, no, actually, this ought to be done this way. That's fine. If it's better and clearer, that's great. But anything is almost better than nothing at the moment. And I think one of the things we have and we're missing is the ability to go back into our 3 years worth of future of text and sort of pull that stuff from a theme.
Right. Okay. So sorry, Peter, but just on this particular thing, if you make the journal much more important, this year it was a bit of an experiment. I don't mind if we have a style guide where there is author name, title, like we have now, and then below that we have a list of keywords or topics, right? And if the author wants to give us single sentence to help, of course the heading should have been the help. And we do that because then we give them a long time to read their own article and say, well, actually, I want it tagged like this, or I find this one offensive or whatever. They get a comment. I think that's fine. So, okay, I agree with you both. We should do that. And then we should look at the distribution mechanisms. I'm paying for this Mastodon server, which is really annoying. I haven't really used it yet. But we should probably have that as being one of the mechanisms. So RSS, hardly anyone uses it. I absolutely love it. So, you have my sympathy. You have my shared passion. Anyway, Peter, please. Sorry.
Okay, I think we could automate categorizing it across feeds just by having a standard set of maybe 5 or 6 one-letter codes, because we already have the notational convention of sticking 2 exclamation points before we drop a URL into the chat. So what if after the 2 exclamation points, you had a B if the link was to someone's bio, a R if the link was to a reference, a S.
No, we're not.
E for demo.
Hang on. Say this again. I may have misunderstood you. Please. I'm so sorry.
Okay. If immediately after the 2 exclamation points, when we're about to flag a resource in the chat,
Right.
you had a 1-letter code, and the 1-letter code was a mnemonic for what kind of resource it is, and that would direct it to the appropriate feed. And we could do that with a very simple Apple script even. So it could be B for someone's bio. So if you were linking to somebody's homepage, you could have a B, or even an H if it was a link to a homepage. How about that? Yeah, H might make sense. So if it's exclamation point H, then you know that the URL after it goes to a homepage. If it's double exclamation points and an S, it would mean it's a link to a source code repository somewhere. If it's a double link and a demo, a D, that means that the link would go off to a live demo.
So are you talking about this would be in the article?
No, I'm saying that this would be a convention that we'd use when we're in the chat. So if I was going to drop a URL, it could be bang, bang. Okay, HTTPS : /
Well, the thing is,
So basically, we put links in the sidebar like this, so that the little letter code after it would tell. Okay, so 2 exclamation O, and then the URL. That means that's an organization's link.
yeah, I don't think anyone remembered to do that consistently. We did try the double exclamation mark for a while, and Mark was the one who did it the longest. So in the coda of the book, that was a different kind of recording. So what I did there is I went into the chat and I took out the few things that were discussed. So that was, quote unquote, a lot of manual work for me to do. And that's absolutely fine to do for a monthly discussion. It's not fine to do for every one of these, obviously, not that you're suggesting that. But to have these, what I really want is when someone says something interesting, just hit the space bar or one key, and then it goes back 10, 15 seconds, gives me a transcript of that later, because clearly I cared about that. That's it. Every time you're paying attention to something, and then you have to code why it's interesting, your brain has to do two things, and it's not listening anymore. So I think it's a good idea, but I think we have tested it, and that became the issue. Now, should we want the result for that? No question. So I do think we can. I do think we'll have more experimental fun if we do this journal. I do think, just like you've both seen the download page for our current book, right?
Yes, you put it in the chat.
It's got all kinds of formats on there to serve whoever wants to use the data. So, Peter, what I like about your idea is in the journal itself, if there's an outbound link, maybe we should try to categorize it there, both for human and for machine readable use. Link types has been discussed forever, but this may be an opportunity to do that. Maybe we should have in the style guide because obviously I hope we'll keep doing the defined terms and glossary, but what about if in the article there is a bio and we have it clearly findable? That might be useful as well. A few things like that. But have we agreed that no matter what comes first, chicken or the egg, we do agree on the premise that it would make sense to release something more frequently than once a year?
Maybe quarterly. I like the spring, summer, fall, winter.
Quarterly is not bad branding. Quarterly is good. Future of text quarterly.
I mean, and that probably means within that,
Peter wins.
that's probably 2 Q&As.
Because within that's 3 months is a quarter, right? So there should be 3 proper presentations. We have to do one every month. They don't have to be on the dot every month, but for each quarterly, there really should be 3. That makes sense.
That's plenty of content. I'd like to circle back round to sort of keywords, but I'm happy to come back to it later if we're still bottoming out this last thing about sort of quarterly.
I'm listening.
Okay, because when we tend to get sort of sidetracked into making, in a sense, what we might feel are too personal judgments about sort of people or content. I sort of come at it from a different view. I'm actually less interested in typing the people. I'm more interested in typing the content, and because actually it's through that you find the people, and it's less. I mean, I totally understand and broadly agree with all the reservations about what you can or can't, what it's pleasant to do about certainly individuals in terms of typing them. But I think it's just being able to go and say, right, this article, whether it's a 10-page article or a half-page thing or even a one-line reflection, relates to this topic, and it's something I would expect to change, because I think most people, when they do sort of what's sometimes referred to as coding in terms of keywording, and others, you go through and you apply terms to something, and it always becomes a multi-pass process because you never get it right out of the box by and large, because things change and you get a better understanding of the nuance. So I would expect some of those things to change, and we have, as out of the trap, we have 3 years worth of stuff we can experiment with, and because actually having a richer strand of information there is one of the ways that we can begin to sort of do thematic bindings, because you should be able to say, well, electronically, give me a binding. Give me a content.
Can you give me 1 minute? Sorry, just 1 minute.
Well, while we're sitting here, Peter, I would say I don't see any particular problem with the suggestions you've made for side markers, because essentially they're something that someone or a system can pick up, and even if they're not used, they're no overhead. If you see $! S and you know what the S means, probably most of the people in the chat will realize there's something after it. So it does no harm. The hardest part, and I keep finding this, is knowing where to go to look stuff up. Because I always get confused. There are so many sort of slightly different URLs about relating to Future Text and Future Text Labs that I just haven't yet internalized which one I go to, and where is the place where I look up stuff like codifying, these little facet markers.
Yeah, actually, sometimes I'm not sure what entry point to point people to when I want to point them at our work too. So
Yeah.
which one of the different entry points should be the canonical homepage for all of it?
Yes, and
we need like a dedicated hub
down,
page.
Yeah, and it falls down from there too, because it says to go there, and then where do you look? And I know from both sides of the fence that it's both at the same time obvious and completely unguessable. Because if you build it, you know where it is. And the reality is, for most of us, unless we go to the same place often enough, it's just not sticky. And the fact that it's not easily guessable is not a bad reflection on the person who made it. It's just that it's not particularly guessable. And there by and large is not an easy way. Fred, we were just reflecting on while we were sort of filling in on the fact that, well, two things to reprise. One is that the sort of faceted marking that is effectively what Peter sort of was positing in the chat, I don't think does any harm. If people don't know what it is, they'll just skip over it. What it's useful for is that if anyone was doing either manually or sort of mediated through some form of code, pulling stuff out of the chat logs, then it's actually a nice marker, because you can more easily search. And the other thing was thinking about that. Well, if we did have these sort of concepts, where would I go to look up? If I sort of thought, oh, what does $!D mean? Where would I go to look that up? It just has to live somewhere.
So let's think this through. Shall we try to go through our old stuff and make it available as well in this manner? I mean, this is one of the key problems of digital text and hypertext, isn't it? What do you do with, where's the boundary?
Okay, well, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, the outer boundary, in terms of the Future of Text, in my mind, is the 3 volumes. That's the outer boundary. And it's arguably 3 paper books, but in reality, it's that and a whole lot of digital stuff. So that's the outer boundary. The most current stuff is obviously the volume 3. But in a sense, from a digital perspective, I find that blurs, and realistically, as an engaged user, or positing myself as an engaged user, what I probably want is not only the latest stuff, but all the older stuff that's relevant to the topic under discussion. Relevance is in the eye of the beholder, so I may well get some stuff that I think, as the individual reader, is not what I meant, but we have to take the rough with the smooth in that. Because sometimes our presumption of linkage or relevant content is it's very, very subjective, and it's not wrong for that, but it's just often very hard for the system that holds our collective knowledge to have the necessary granularity. But being able to just say, okay, well, I'm interested in I don't know, I'm trying to think, moving documents from actual reality to virtual reality, and I'm not sure what the short term for that would be, but to get something that maybe has touched that, and it might span over several seasons, would be a useful thing to be able to do, which we can't easily do at the moment, mainly because we haven't keyworded, in the very small K sense, our content.
Right, but so a more basic question then would be, should we, for instance, take all the articles we have over the last 3 books and make hear me out, PDF of each one of them? Or should we go retroactively and reformat into journal for this? Actually, this I think we should do, because this doesn't worry me about DOI so much and ISBNs and all of that. We can do the 3 last books, turn them into quarterlies retroactively, be honest about it being retroactively. and do it in this format. We do one, we experiment a little bit with where do we put the dialogue, where do we do this, that, and the other. But what do you think? What should we? How should we make it? Sorry, someone just sent me an email about Doug, so it was in the subject. It caught my attention. I apologize. What I'm saying is, Mark and me are obviously going to Rome this summer for hypertext. I hope you will join us, Peter. And as we're there, we can imagine roaming the hallways of Rome, talking to people, and if they ask what we're doing, we would like to talk about this as one of the things we're doing. So just to play it out, we could say, yeah, we do the book, but to make it, to have a new person and entice them that they should spend a little bit of time looking at what we're doing, it's probably a quarterly, right? And we should probably, I mean, I desperately want to have one medium be PDF. I'm okay with doing some kind of HTML-y stuff and all of that as well. We're going into VR for crying out loud. So it would be nice if we give them, they go to the website, there's a quarterly journal, and this requires a hell of a lot of manual work, but I can do that. You know, I do want to invest in this, where they can choose on the website maybe to view by person or the kind of categories we talked about. And when they find that, it doesn't necessarily have to give them one article, it can give them the journal. And then they click on that and they get the quarterly. So maybe the downloadable unit of knowledge will be, sorry, laptop power, will be still the quarterly, but we can provide other means to find out what's in it. That kind of makes sense. Does that make sense, guys?
Oh, let me share a link, somewhat unrelated. There's a foresight agency called Space 10, and they used a platform called Spatial to produce a VR replica of their headquarters that's accessible over the head or with a headset on. So people who are just coming in with an ordinary web page can wander around in the space, as well as people who have full VR gear. And it looks like they have a free tier for small organizations that basically give you a little one-room VR homestead to get together to chat at. I just want to share that link when it crossed my desk.
Okay.
Let me give you the main company too, because there'd be no cost with that, which is very nice. Here we are. Okay, dropping you the platform's URL next. There. And of course, what jumped at me was it was good for people with VR gear as well as without VR gear, and provides a nice seamless interface.
Spatial, yeah, but okay. I mean, is this in regards to the VR discussion in general, or in terms of showing people the work, or what? What's the key you're thinking about here?
Well, if you look in the Space 10's virtual room, they actually have artifacts representing web projects and books that they've put out. So there's like a table that has a picture of their book on cities, and if you click on that, it will then jump you off to the main resource. So it's a very interesting little spatial finding aid. And I could easily see us having a room there with a table with all 3 volumes of The Future of Text, all the different journal entries laid out in a virtual magazine rack on the wall.
Yeah,
And you can sort of like hang out in the lobby and talk to other people at the same time.
I'm not very enthralled by that. The Second Life thing, to walk around, I think takes the worst of the real world and fetishizes it. You know, oh, I have to talk to you, Mark. Let me spend 5 minutes walking with a keyboard. You know, I don't get that. And also in VR, just like you, Peter, I get queasy quite easily if I move by joystick. So I think that most VR experiences within knowledge work and social for work stuff will be seated or standing by your desk or something really like that. So that's why what you wrote about in the book about more experimental spaces, I find much more interesting than a virtual coffee shop kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think also my sense is most knowledge work is going to be actually fairly personal. It may be something you share in due course with other people, but I think if I've learned anything over time, it's actually knowledge, certainly in the early stages, really, really untidy. And it's hard enough understanding your own untidiness without trying to explain to somebody else. Or you do the worst possible thing is you make it tidy and pretty, and then nobody understands it.
Yeah. I think we made some progress here. I think we've decided number one, video. Excuse me, video. My screen is annoying me. Another quarterly. That's going to be our key unit moving forward. We will do a book at the end, but that should be almost copy and paste, right?
Yeah.
It may be copy and paste and without the dialogue, because that can be referred to, go back in the journal and read it there.
Mm-hmm.
Or it can be a very heavily edited dialogue where a few things came up. Maybe, right? Okay. So
I have a question. I didn't see the Foundation series that Apple had on its Apple TV, and I was wondering, did they have a depiction of the Prime Radiant?
they did.
book?
They had
And what was that like?
nonsense, beautiful but nonsense. It, you know, floating little dots in the air. So very lovely, but without looking at it, of course, it can be inspirational. But the thing is, you know, we kind of have to decide on some realities here. And Peter, you were here on Monday, right?
No, I was taking Mom in for.
Okay. No, that's good, because I thought
visit.
I thought I was hallucinating that you weren't there. I didn't. That's good that I was remembering reality. Anyway, the Future of Text 4 will be around texts in education and academia,
Oh, I love it.
including self-learning. Part of that is because for the Future of Text wider initiative, I need to promote my software. So it is very honestly all connected for me. I need more teachers to know about Visual Meta. I need them to know about Reader and Author. So I'm going to use this book to help me network, talk to universities and say, we have this book series, we have a journal, who can we interview? So that's the thing about it. Has to be real. It has to be, you know, accessible to these people. A lot of the ideas of how we do the packaging, so to speak, we need to keep talking about, but I think we've agreed on the quarterly. I think we've agreed that we're going to experiment with categories. On our website, you know, all the chat logs are up, unless I missed by accident. Some of our transcripts are up, all the videos are connected. I think we can go back to all the previous articles and do something similar, make them findable on the web. And Peter, the kind of sci-fi nonsense you're talking about would be really good if we can figure out a way to implement it. I would love to see something nonsense and poetic like that. It could be good.
Well, the way I always sort of envisioned it was more like a project management chart on steroids when I was reading the Foundation series. So to my mind, I pictured, you know, different branching alternatives to different futures and then having them coalesce back into each other and converge on some threads or diverge on other threads. So again, I was like picturing a sort of a non-linear project management chat graphical visualization But I was kind of hoping that Apple had done that, but I guess it'd be too much to expect them to go out and actually try to build a viable working Prime Radiant prototype to stick in their sci-fi movie.
It's interesting you say that, because it makes me reflect on something that it's an irony that, for instance, we're seeing, people sort of moving, for instance, to do again sort of, knowledge exploration, PKM type stuff in 3D. But actually, what are we ending up with? Well, basically outlines. But much more interesting is exactly the sort of thing you mentioned, which is, well, okay, so it branches apart here, and it goes back, but maybe not all of it. So it's a bit like an enormous Sankey diagram. In other words, that there are flows through the system, and occasionally it loops right back, or sometimes it just runs into a dead end. And that kind of thing is actually quite hard to show on 2D, because you end up constantly having to make enough space to sort of pull something from the back and flatten it into the foreground. But that branch is, well, it's not the branching is outlines. It's the coming back together or the looping around that's really interesting. And that's what I see as one of the real advantages of VR. Not so much because it appears to be in 3D, but that you can effectively look at the thing. I don't want to call it a graph, from a different angle, and much as you walk around a sculpture.
Right,
Yeah.
and there is the theorem that in 3D you can represent a general graph without having any lines crossing over each other, because you can tease them out enough to route all the lines around each other.
I noticed you said in theory. I immediately thought of that diagram behind me, the Afghan counterinsurgency one.
I think it's one of those deals where it can be done, but you don't have an efficient algorithm to do the job.
Mm.
But in principle.
But I'm more and more coming to sort of see this with clarity, this sense that the difference between structure for purpose and structure for visual prettiness, and it's unfortunately something that we are, I think, generally as a norm, predisposed to the latter, and that helps us not.
Everybody's quiet.
Yeah, if they were doing the visualization for, say, the Alien franchise, it might be more likely to be biased towards practicality over prettiness.
Yeah, I mean, I had hoped we would have more VR kind of craziness this time, as you know. That didn't really happen. But, we're getting a few things.
In fairness, I mean, I take your point. I mean, in a sense, I'm also, well, I was surprised I'm less so now, because I think when I heard Brandel and Fabian sort of tease apart actually how much sort of quite detailed knowledge there was just to stand anything up at all, I'm reminded of other sort of areas where I've dabbled in where we're still some way from someone like myself, feeling confident to just dive in and do something. It doesn't mean I can't make anything at all, but it goes back to this sort of time thing. If it's going to take me more time than I have to get to the point where I think it's even worth sort of getting to the next level, that tends to be a sort of showstopper. And that's a very different point of view to the perspective of someone who's prototyping, because as Fabian articulates very neatly, well, that's not really the point. You just get stuck in and you do it. But you're coming from a different angle. You that is what you're out to do.
Right. Do you start now, or do you wait for next year's tools that would make it easier to get to where you want to go?
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I mean, for what I really hoped we would have, it was prototypes. I didn't expect us to necessarily have the book fully available for people to explore everything in VR. No, not at all. And we did get some of that.
Well, I think what another way of circling back to this thing about the general immaturity of the tools is that So I had imagined, I had imagined that I was being helpful by making out some data sets that people could use, and it transpired they weren't. And I doesn't worry me at all in that sense, because because I wasn't doing it from a sense of, a sense of sort of kudos or something, but I thought I was actually helping because I would make some other task easier for somebody else. And I think what I realized is, well, we're not even at the point where that actually helps. It's still so difficult to do stuff that, although we're seeing some prototypes, they are so narrowly built. It's not just like the cowboy town where there are all the facades and a prop at the back. No. It's really standing on the top of a pinhead. The bit you see is there, but there's only the necessary and sufficient to stand it up, and that's not a bad thing. That just shows actually how damn hard it is at the moment to get to the point of just showing something. And so, it'll come, but the sort of things that we want to be discussing are frustratingly slightly longer off. And it also means it's quite difficult to do the things that you've rightly mentioned, this idea of being ahead of the curve in terms of, well, what is the convention? What is the gesture for this? But again, I think it's possibly too early because there aren't enough stable things to play with, where you're not worrying about whether the whole thing's going to fall over during the use of it, that we can begin to effectively explore those things.
Yeah, to an extent, but what I'm really talking about is, testing. I mean, so I want to do, as you know, author and reader in BR. At least I've started speccing it. And that means I have to make decisions on interactions and what is important. And one thing I found is just mentally, and also having done some of the hubs mock-ups, to actually read text, a book today, 2-page book on a stand is probably the best we're ever going to get, just to read nicely done text. However, when you come across a mural, and I really want murals in books, I don't think Bob understands how passionate I am about that. What should the interaction be to go from reading the book to now seeing it big? Because if you come across just a graph, you don't necessarily want the graph to be massive.
Mm.
And you hardly ever want the text just to be massive. So this is something, if we do this coding together, we can probably figure out. So we can do, because one thing that is easy is that we have visual meta. So we can say at the back of the book, page so-and-so, there's a picture there. Or obviously there are issues with how you find the crop and all, of course there are, no question. But the basic notion of, you do that for reading, and then you have this. Like, for instance, in our book, we have a few pictures from the symposium. Even the resolution in the book, when I make them really large, fake large in VR, it's really quite pleasant. And of course, video in VR is really nice as well. And so VR, AR, I make no distinction for this type of usage. So these are really important and valuable things that we can do. And then now that we have the notion of a quarterly being our key size, we should also probably start having different documents, and I say that in PDF and HTML and whatever, but addressable units available for all the bios. So that if someone wants to view this by people, now that we have 3 years of content, they should be able to do that finally. And this whole notion of categories, yes, we can do that. There will be people who don't agree, and I agree with you guys. They can tell us to change it. It's okay. So let me just think. Since no one's here, and I consider you guys nobodies in the best possible way, how about we set Monday, the 19th of December, to be a planning day for just how, let's say, basically the website of the book. What should we try to put on the website? That could be fun, right?
Idea.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that will fold neatly into that was the thing that we were just riffing on while you stepped out a moment ago, which is effectively, and I deliberately don't want to give it a name at this point because that's part of the job of the Monday is sort of basically, where's the first place you go to find stuff? So you've heard about something, somebody's recommended, or you remember, there was a URL to something. So it's a place to find things. And I deliberately want to approach it from that perspective rather than saying, as I would otherwise do. This is how you solve this problem. No, let's start from the how do I find the piece of paper I had in my hand yesterday? And it's always difficult, but and because it probably smushes together quite a few historical categories where, because we treated them differently. And where things live will probably be somewhere else, and they will be stored. It's this sort of search gate you go through, where I'm trying to avoid something where there's just an awkward box you search in. It's giving some sort of prompts as to what's there, and some sense of what people might find.
Well,
and the other thing is separate from the style book. I mean, the style book, as I was relating it to you, was, quite literally the kind of thing when I was doing some sub-editing and I saw a rule. Right, what does a rule imply for the copy editor and the reader? And then you explain it to me. It's fine. It's that kind of thing that until you're doing it day in, day out, and the copybook, it's really just that prompt, so that once a convention has needed to be established, that the first person who has to do that can write it down so when other people trip over it, they know what it is. But that needn't affect probably the general reader. But we might have, the reason I mention this is there may be something that's a style book of a different kind, which is basically to do it, riffing off a similar theme, but for a reader rather than somebody who's actually doing production work.
So I guess we will use future text publishing for this. So one of the first things we can do is have one contributor per line, and have next to it just written, what they're in. And so let's say for Andrea, she's been in volume 3. So if you click on Andrea, sorry, you're blocking my view. Then all that happens is it opens this, which of course would be quarterly so-and-so, right? And we will now rebrand the journal. Should we just call it quarterly? Or should we just keep calling it journal? Or should we
call it the journal? I mean, because, if for no other reason than having made it quarterly, that, you may suddenly find that there's some pressing reason why we decide we only want 3 a year or something. Just call it a journal.
People quarterly. How cool is that?
Yeah, it's fine, but I mean, I wouldn't put it this way. I don't think there's anything pressing on us to change the name.
Yeah.
In the page you showed previously of list of attendees, is there any reason that I'm overlooking why those couldn't all be links to effectively that person's page within our information system? So where you had that link of all the authors, they needn't be underlined or something, because most people, we got to the age, I think, where somebody knows if they move their finger point or whatever.
There's a couple of things. Number one, a few of them have written in 2 or more places. So we should definitely do something along the lines of having the links, having, like, let's see here, you come across Sam Brooker, there should absolutely be a reference to where he is. Actually, can you excuse me for another second? I have to go.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, we could color code them and assign a different color component to each volume of the Future of Text.
Yeah, except, well, I suppose you do everyone, you end up with your sort of rainbow color. But what I was just thinking is literally that, viewed from a hypertextual perspective rather than a pure publishing perspective, that basically if I click Sam Brooker under any of the volumes, that will put me at a page, a URL about Sam Brooker, which might say, okay, he's contributed to volume 2 and volume 3, and I could push through that way. So and the page, if they've got some bio information. So again, there's an interesting tension here between the sort of the PDF approach, that whilst digital is effectively paper, and a purely hypertextual thing where it's it's just a bit of information within the overall system. And in fact, realistically, in this day and age, it would sort of be like a database-y thing, because it would effectively be a snippet of information in the overall graph. And oh, look, you want Sam Brooker. Oh, right. Well, you want to know what he contributed to the stuff we have on him in his glossary, and or maybe links to each of the individual articles. And that's something that the technology can do for us. Certainly when it's something unique like a person. The thematic bit gets harder because we have to do the thematic coding. I was just saying that basically, you know, where you have that page of contributors to any given journal, I was imagining in my mind's eye that if I put my cursor, finger, pointer, whatever, over Bob Horn, for sake of argument, that's what I see on the middle of the screen at the moment, that would open a URL about Bob Horn. It would have basically his bio, if we have one, or / glossary, whatever, and links to any articles that he'd written, accessible via the website.
Let's think about this.
Yep.
So let's just go back to the front page. No, actually we can do, and then we go edit. So here's the most basic thing we can do. The Future of Text, Volume 2. And you can make the heading the link, first of all, right? So that means, let's just see if it renders correctly. And then we had one, didn't we? Right. Of course, it would be nice if it, you know, click on a name and you could immediately open up the article. Okay, at least this now, if you find someone here, you can click on this and it goes to there.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the bare minimum. So you want to have bios in here too?
Well, no, want is the wrong way of putting it. I'm not coming at it from that angle. What I'm thinking is that, and this unintentionally runs slightly counter to your sort of PDF bounded notion, is that what I'm thinking is that we know that Andy, Barbara Tversky is someone, so that if I click that, it would go to the website / Barbara Tversky or a URL of that type, and it would be a page that would be just her name, the information that was available within the Future of Text about that person. So it might be, you know, it might be a long bio, might just be nothing, and also that page its job would also be to hold anything they'd authored, where effectively they were the main contributing author to that thing, and we might also end up coming up with other categories, things they might have, if it was people more in the central group, you know, it might be okay, and these are projects or activities that they took part in.
Would it be too much to have the whole thing like this?
Sorry?
Maybe have this, you know, to have it, to have the bios just written down on the page, make it a long page.
It would be yes, you could have it so that if you clicked on the name, it expanded, contracted, but then you're getting into sort of the trouble with that is then everything's living behind a wall of sort of hard to maintain, you know, was state of the art when we first used it, web fanciness. Personally, I come back to this thing that, you know, the more you see, the simpler I want it. So if I want to know about Andrea, basically I just go to it, you know, I have a URL that would hold that information. Now, I'm not saying
that's a ton of pages.
Yeah, I know it's a ton of pages, but it's a ton of people. But that's one of the things that is earlier in this conversation has been alluded to, that we want to know. But the information is there. Okay. It's just this shows up a really interesting thing about, in a sense, that where the PDF metaphor we have at the moment, it's there in the metaphor. It's not particularly useful. The place it's usable is in the visual meta, and the visual meta could then be reamed out to give us this information. But I totally agree it's a body of work, which is why you wouldn't want to start doing it unless there was a general consensus that it's right. But I would add the codicil that this will only get bigger over time.
Yeah.
So
No, but this is really
the more it's compressed and locked into a PDF, the less accessible it is to us.
Yeah. I know you're right. Okay, so let's follow what you're saying, because what you're saying is what's called clever. Okay, so let's say instead of me having to do a link every single time to that volume 3 or whatever, should we do tags or categories? I guess we could do tag, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what the difference between tags and categories. I mean, that's presumably that's just WordPress terminology, is it? It's not a sort of.
Yeah, no, it's not perfect. But now at least we have, hang on. So she's also in our journal, so I don't know about that. So, okay, I'm just going to remove that for now. What is this updating nonsense?
I'm guessing, given it's taken so long, maybe it's actually updating your WordPress install on the server rather than the page.
You don't live in Wimbledon, do you? It's probably just crap internet.
Boy, first world service, eh?
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to leave page and go forward, reload, make it all fresh again. Okay, no. Add a line break here. So basically it'll be roughly the same style as we have in the book. So here we have, just want to check if we have a tag. Yeah, tag volume 1, right? So what we should be able to do then automatically, and I can't see the actual tag here. Very odd, but let's go to the front page. No, that's not here either. We should be able to list by tags, obviously. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And that should be half the work. Posts, okay, tags, here we go. So view, volume 1. Boom.
Yeah. And funnily enough, as you very presciently ordered all the names of the contributors in the book literally in A to Z sort order rather than on last names, we don't have to worry about someone saying, oh, well, it's a different order on this page than it is in the book. It's good.
And it does see it, so now it's also a link. I'm just going to do a few now, just so we get a feel for it, and then we can see how it is. So we've got to make sure he's got the tag volume 3. Was the other one volume 1 by mistake? What happened there?
Not sure.
Oh, this is weird. Why did that go all massive?
I wouldn't know. I haven't used WordPress. I can't write HTML like this. It just does my head in.
Yeah, they try to make it not messy, and as a consequence, they make it more messy.
No, it's just I prefer to write in raw HTML because then I understand what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it doesn't make much sense.
And I should acknowledge for the record that I know that's not what most people want to do.
No. Okay, so now I could just do this. Contributors. So here it doesn't show the underline, which is just stupid.
Well, actually, to a certain extent, on those big lists, it's actually quite nice to not have an underline. Otherwise, you get tons of visual noise, and it's quite, especially in the white on black, it would be inelegant, to say the least, if all those were underlined.
Well, that's the only way people here will know that it's a link. So
No. I mean, I think actually, it's the kind of thing where it's discoverable enough because if your cursor rolls over something, oh right, these are links. I'm not going to die in a ditch over it. I mean, I don't mind them being underlined, but I wouldn't be upset if they weren't, because I think it's quite legitimate in that sort of thing. It's only because it's that difficult problem where you get to the point where there are so many links that it's all links and nothing else, and then the underlining loses its salience.
yeah, exactly. It no longer highlights; it just makes a mess. So I noticed here that I think I made a mistake with Andrea. That's I think I made her volume 1. And now they're not, what? Now I've lost those 2 links. The joys of WordPress. This is why I can never be a programmer. There's always some kind of a thing to sort out.
Yeah, well, then a programmer wouldn't use WordPress. it's a sort of,
No,
it's designed to make it, so you don't have to see behind the curtain, which is a great advantage if you don't want to or can't see, or can't understand what's
but
going
the
on.
programmer has to deal with these niggles of, hey, that didn't work as expected. So now we have to, after this, go through and check that all of them are in the correct category. Yeah. Should we have them in a box still, or should we have them below each other now?
Well, I think they're fine. If you put them in a long list, people won't scroll that far. This gives reasonable compression of the information. Presumably the page for the person links back to, is tagged for all the things they contributed for. The person under a heading, so volume 3, for instance, just links to the person page. So that's how it hypertextually meshes together. So someone can contribute to all 3 volumes. They'll list once under each volume because they're a contributor to it, but they all point to the same page.
Yeah, at this point. I mean, if the whole thing was only web-based, of course we could link to the article.
Well, one thing you could do, if it's a halfway house, is that if the articles were essentially either pre-packaged as single article PDFs or could be run out on the fly, in which case I'd still store them, because there's no point in, if one thing's very popular, you might as well make it once, and the other 999 people get the one that was made earlier. That's one way of serving it, rather than actually having to effectively recopy edit all the articles into HTML just so they can be served in an HTML fashion. And I don't think, given that the PDFs are pretty clean and would probably have visual meta, that anyone's going to complain wildly about that. I mean, by and large, people want what they want when they want it. And if you ask them before the fact, they'll want all sorts of whistles and bells. In the moment, as long as they get to the thing they wanted and the bit of information they wanted resting within it, my experience is that actually they're quite happy to do without all the things they lobbied so hard for, myself included.
I haven't given Björn a damn thing.
So would it be right to say that at this point, making per contributor pages is a fully manual exercise, because the bio has got to be pulled out of the book?
Yeah.
I mean, I did that. That's not a loaded question. I'm just sort of saying, okay, that's fine. Then again, this sort of work is actually fairly rote. So this is something that sort of pretty much anyone could do, because it doesn't require, making that list doesn't require any particularly special knowledge. As long as you know where to find the source material, and you know that 300 names on a page need to link to however many unique names there are worth of per person pages, and on that page it will need to have the following bits and pieces which come from the following sources. The only ambiguity in that would be if, for the sake of argument, one of us had contributed to all 3 volumes and our bio is different in each, in which case I assume we take the most recent one.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, this is just rote nonsense. I'm just, while I'm talking to you, just going through a few of them.
Well, what I mean is this actually is something that probably that the Human Turk can probably sort of magic away.
Yeah.
Which means that the conversation we should probably be having is, well, what do we want that? So in other words, what does the person page look like? The person page obviously is going to say who they are. We've got a bio so we can use it. It will need to list and or link to their contributions. But the question is that all that goes there? So for instance, it could be for someone like Fabian, it could link to his demos and things.
Yeah, I was thinking it would just be this. It would just be their whatever's in the book.
And it's actually a good start, because apart from anything else, now it's been teased apart. The fact that it's in web form probably makes it easier for somebody to do something clever and take the information and make it into a another form of map, a bit like you have in Author.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to show you something here that you may or may not approve of. So let's see. Sandbroker will probably be a good one. That's the new pop-up.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
All
Nice.
it does.
Yeah.
If you click on it, depending on what's behind it, it'll either just search online or it'll open the DOI if there is a known DOI.
Oh, cool. And so this is in Reader, is it now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah, I just went past the point of having it to have it, and now it's trying to make it readable and a little better looking. It's a bit wide, but I'm not going to complain about that too much.
Sure.
Looks good to me, Frode.
Thank you. So that's not where I'm meant to be. Okay. All right. So yeah, so this can be done slowly.
Well, the other thing, it's not as if, and the other thing is, it's not as if anyone's saying we've got to have this by yesterday, but as part of the movement to this growing corpus of work. I mean, one of the reasons for having the per author pages is I'm always amazed that the thing that everyone really, really, really wants to know, whenever you show them a set of data, is you want to know who worked with who where. And I've never seen it well done, and I've never seen it asked for ever outside the context of saying to people, what would you like to know about this data? It's just something seemed to root it. Maybe it's just we like looking through the net curtains at what other people are doing. I don't know. But the reality, this idea that, well, if you've got 8 people on a paper distributed across 4 continents, where literally are they? If you want to make these sort of assumptions, that there's a wonderfully flawed presumption that just by magically looking at the data like that, it will tell you where all the hot things are happening. And I can't see how that happens when you actually know what the data looks like.
I can see that it's a useful direction, but
Oh, I'd agree. It's just that the richness of our data is not well curated enough to allow that. We sort of assume that when we say, oh, did X work with Y? Well, if that's one of 3 jobs, and in fact they were working with them in their, they actually work in Germany, but they're the visiting professor in Buenos Aires. Does this mean that the center of this subject is Buenos Aires? And at which point people then, so I have to go get a cup of coffee, but they still really, really want to know the answer to what they thought was a simple question, which of course is not simple.
Yeah. Boom, I just had to write myself a note there. Yeah, okay. I think we can adjourn for today with the thought that we are going to talk about this kind of stuff more actively. Right?
Sounds good. Oh, and I should note that next Tuesday in the Strumenta Programming Language Design community for domain-specific languages, they're going to be having a talk on code reading. It looks like it's going to be interesting. So I'll report back on what they have to say there.
Cool.
I certainly know that I won't be able to make next Friday, which is Christmas Eve, and I suspect people will be
Come
out
on,
at that hour.
come on. Yes, me too.
And in fact, I probably won't be back till after New Year's. I mean, I'm around and about, but I will be less available than I have been. But I'm also reachable if anyone's got any questions. And also, I give my apologies once again for ducking out at the beginning of the conversation for some urgent off-screen thing had to be resolved.
Off-screen activity.
Maybe we should plan to not meet next Friday because it will be Christmas Eve. And
Yeah, no, yeah. I don't think that's going to be a major day for us. I think
right. Friday isn't Christmas Eve, it's the day before Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Well, in Norwegian Christmas, that is the Christmas day. And you know why, right?
No, why?
It's the way that you count when the day starts. And it used to be in the tough Viking countries that the next day would start when the sun went down, not in the middle of the night. So that's why for us, the 25th starts then.
I thought we were going to say it's because the Grinch stole Christmas.
Yeah, that's a bit painful memory of the Grinch. Yes. Anyway, so that's why. So we're having Norwegian Christmas with my mother. Hopefully, she'll be fine. On the Friday, Christmas Eve, and then we will have English and Ukrainian on the next day. So it's all
right. Yes. Menu of international cuisine. Verily, I hope your Ma's on the mend.
Yeah, she's getting a angiogram tomorrow. So on Monday, not tomorrow. So that's going to be good. So they're going to go in and check if it's this or that with the heart. All a bit stressful, this parental stuff, isn't it? This is
very
okay, isn't it? I mean, obviously, a few have been missed, and I'll go back later, but they've been missed only because of the weirdness of things. But it is a slight help. We need assistance, don't we, people? People who don't mind doing donkey work for us. Oh, well, I have you here.
But anyway, the good thing is you've got the broad strokes of it there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. So I can, oh yeah, you can't see my screen anymore, can you? But let me just show you this real briefly. So what we've done now, we've worked a bit on the on this stuff. So boom, do you see that? Boom,
Yeah.
all people got hidden. And also you can if you put things off the screen, it makes the screen a bit bigger. So if you want to have it a bit wider, you can.
Yeah.
So I find that quite surprisingly useful. But one thing I've asked him to do, dear old Jacob, is when you do this and it comes back, all of these should then be selected. So if you want to do a layout, you should be able to do that. We don't have many automatic layouts. All we have is things like this, you know, align center. But I think that's going to be pretty crucial.
Yeah, I ought to send you, because you probably haven't seen it. Actually, Mark Van, I've got in Keynote form, which is probably as good as any, but his actually a very nice presentation he did on effectively, you might say, a sort of a grammar of layout that's sort of different from others, but just making some very simple conventions about how, not in a graphic design sense, but more in an information understanding sense, you know, some fairly small adjustments can actually give you quite useful sort of grouping.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is a hugely important topic for this. So yeah, there we are. The whole magic of, you know, you have something selected and how do you want to see it is, yeah, I think I agree, that's a big deal. That is a big deal. But yeah, this Monday we will meet, right? And we can go through more of this. I'll try to do a little bit of donkey work so we have something.
Probably the interesting thing, actually, if you're doing something, is do someone like Fabian, because that will give us a useful discussion point, because he's done more and different things as to what else the sort of person, the contributor page might or should show, because I think there's a useful discussion to which will flow between the poles of, well, why doesn't it just show me everything, which is an unbounded amount of work, to what realistically should it link to. I mean, one that strikes me outside the sense of articles is, for instance, things like demos.
Is what?
Things like his demos, you know, like on the VR page. So it could point out to that. But that's a category of things that you won't find in the book. Most other things, you know, the book will suffice. A link to that will eventually get you to the article in whatever form should be fine. My sort of thinking here is to cut down actually the amount of sort of ongoing rote work.
Yeah. Yeah, but what about his demos? You mean having them listed in a specific time content?
Yeah, so the point being, when for whatever reason, by whatever means, you arrive at the site that describes Fabian, for sake of example, that you will see the obvious things, which are links back into the Future of Text books. But the one other useful thing, outside links in his bio and things, that it relates to the Future of Text might be, it's more so really this last year than previous years, but some of the VR demos.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they will stay up a lot long enough for us to use them. But yeah.
Well, it's fine, and I think you know, generally people who use the web for a bit, you know, understand that, you know, not everything lasts forever. But at least you know where it was when it was last seen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Plus the fact that, you know, if person X has done 10 demos, well, even if you can't see any of them, you know they've done 10 demos, so they've had some sort of skin in the game, so to speak. And if you were interested in that particular aspect of the Future of Text, then you might very well want to get in touch with them. To ask them things, whether or not you can see the demos. That's sort of the thinking in the back of my mind.
Also, a question for you particularly, Mark, is I'm noticing there are a few things that we're missing. For instance, there is a bio missing. So I think I should probably update the public version of that. But since it's early days and we're just adding something obvious, we don't need to start worrying about version numbers, right? Or should we?
No. My tacit suggestion I wouldn't overburden myself with this. I mean, unless basically money or lives depend on it, at this point, putting some versioning in would, given that it would actually all be quite manual, is I think just loading more data. Sorry, loading more sort of admin task on. In the wider sense and in the way we discussed it with Visual Meta and things, yes, it matters. But at this point, while the thing is still sort of getting out into the light of day, I'm not sure I'd bother.
Okay. That's cool. I'm down to Fabienne now. That's how many I've done. So exciting. Should be a quicker way to make a new post, but at least I get to see things.
Well, there may be some. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know where to start, but I would imagine there probably is a way to automate that in WordPress.
Probably.
But it would probably take me. It would certainly take me longer than it would take to do it manually to figure that out.
Yeah, that's an issue.
I don't know, but someone like Fabian or Adam might know. I'm not suggesting they volunteer to do it, but they might at least sort of know whether it's, might say, oh, yeah, that's definitely possible.
Yeah, if they were here, I would ask them. They are not here. They are not present and correct, as we say. And down to Jack Couch. Yeah, so do you feel that the plan for next year with the quarterlies and, really trying to streamline the workflow makes sense? That was a question.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sounds good.
I thought you had disappeared there for a moment.
If nothing else, it stops the end of the year being quite so sort of end loaded with admin work.
Yeah, and I'm very good at making mistakes. So it's like last week we published supposedly, but today is when it's going out. We had a week for things and to see if there were any last minute contributions coming in, which there wasn't, which is fair enough. And that way we can keep having better quality control over the year. So it's cool.
I am guessing that a week from Christmas is probably a hard push for getting extra, thinking, oh, should I just do that extra article? Maybe I'll just go to the party instead.
Yeah, that may be something there. Maybe indeed. So Edgar's been out playing with a friend all day. They invited him over, so now in a few minutes we're going to leave to have dinner with them, which is nice. There aren't that often dinners with parents and parents of Edgar's friends.
All right.
So it's a lovely when it happens.
Well, have a great weekend.
You too, and I'm happy your mom's outlook looks better. That's good, very, very good.
That's great. You can appreciate the red of the poinsettias now.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, see you guys on Monday. Bye.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye to all.